Kia ora everyone, this is Anderson's Odyssey. I'm Jacob Anderson and my guest today is Pippa Lady Blake. Pippa's an artist and patron of Blake. Pippa, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, Kia ora, and here I am over in the UK and very much wishing that I was with all you guys in New Zealand.
Yeah, how is it over there? I mean, it's still for you guys. Have you been experiencing I guess the wildlife and the birds coming back into the gardens and the other things that we've been experiencing here?
Yeah, well, I guess that's one of the positives, is that certainly the to not have all those planes flying overhead, very few cars on the road, has been amazing. I mean, the air really is clearer. I mean, I live near the sea, so definitely there's been far more wildlife out there, and hearing the birds singing has really been amazing. But of course, now as we're beginning to ease out of lockdown, or I think we won't be out of full lockdown for a very long time, more cars on the road, and I'm very anxious now that, well, not anxious, very interested and concerned to see what the pollution levels will be like. And let's hope we can just manage, governments be sensible and try and just keep that environment, huge environmental concerns that have risen up, that we can keep those at bay. Let's hope.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to watch how each country's responding and reacting. And what one thing I was interested to talk to you about is you've done some work and you've called it utopia dystopia, which was done a few years ago, but is kind of fitting at the moment because we are seeing both some amazing positives happening as a reaction to this, but of course it is a global pandemic and something we haven't seen in a generation. What was the motivation behind Utopia Dystopia?
Well, that's actually the name that I came up with. It was a theatre production, and I was the artist in residence on it. I mean, I chose the play. The play was actually called Pitcairn. So it was about Pitcairn Island. It was about the Bounty. It was about Fletcher Christian and the mutineers and them arriving at the island. The Bounty was set on fire and sunk. There was absolutely no escape. So there they were, trapped on an island, and they'd been to Tahiti and found some women, and they were taking them off to lead this sort of supposedly idyllic life on Pitcairn Island, which of course is quite a hostile and rocky island. And I guess in a way a bit like Lord of the Flies, it seemingly was, this is amazing, we're going to have this wonderful adventure and we'll grow crops, we'll grow breadfruit, and the whole thing just fell apart because people are people, humans are humans, and they unfortunately there were some not so good guys, and it ended up being really quite a bloodthirsty and violent ending to quite a few of those people. It was a sort of tragic story, but many of those people, let's face it, are still on that island, and I don't know how much what it's like now. Perhaps there are very few now. There have been some issues, I know, there, but it was a really fascinating play to work on. And yeah, that whole utopia dystopian thing, and I've always been, I don't know what it is in my genes, but I've always been very interested in that whole idea of apocalypse, post-apocalypse, and how people meld together, work together or don't work together. And I guess in a way we're seeing it a bit now. I mean, wow, look at the world and look what's happening now.
What do you think it is that inspires artists or intrigues artists about that kind of apocalyptic world story? I mean, you hear about it a lot in movies and in art and in music. What do you think that is?
I think it's hard to put a finger on it, but I think it's because it's a very big idea, but it's also a very real idea. And I think as an artist or creative of any kind, you have that, I mean, your imagination can run riot, and it's, I mean, artists throughout the ages have used that as a theme. And I think it's just because it's something very powerful about it. and the imagery too. And as someone, I love nature, and I mean, I've recently, well, actually not recently, I've read, you know, that Cormac McCarthy, The Road, which is, I mean, it's all pretty dismal, dismal, but there's some amazing imagery. I think it's more to do with imagery for me, but and also imagery and tragedy. I mean, it's sort of epic themes, I suppose.
Yeah, that fragility, I think, for me is probably one that stands out, and then how people overcome that adversity. And what I'm seeing so interesting right now is all of the positives out of this, and all of the new things that we can look forward to. And when you've been traveling around the world, and sailing around the world, have you seen some of those things yourself, and has that kind of drawn some of that inspiration in some of your paintings?
I don't think the dystopian side that I've seen, because I haven't, because I mean, we've had many amazing adventures all around the world, and on the whole seen what beautiful places there are, and which is what Peter was so keen on, to, you know, try and keep them beautiful, keep them, I mean, you know, they're not just beautiful but important. I mean, when I was last sailing, doing long voyages, we were only just beginning to be aware of, yeah, the huge damage can be done by pollution and plastics, the ocean. I mean, obviously we yeah, it was only just beginning to be awareness that you do not chuck stuff over the side. I mean, I'm talking really about sort of 25, 30 years ago. And obviously, you know, the world has changed hugely since those times. But there were people who would go on ocean voyages and just dump their rubbish over the side, and think how tragic that was. I mean, that plastic is probably still there.
Yeah, almost certainly still is, and probably will be for hundreds of years more, unfortunately. When you've sailed a lot around the world, did that start at a young age for you, or where did that kind of where did that stem from? I suppose, was that when you met Peter, or?
Yes, I mean, I grew up by the sea, so I'd always sailed, or I'd call it messing about in boats, and very, yeah, having fun. And where I live is on an estuary, and it's very tidal and very muddy. So there were a lot of antics, you know, getting stuck in the mud and coming home late. And but it was fun. It was more social sailing, and I did some racing as well. So it wasn't really until I met Peter, and at that stage I'd actually been at art school for 4 years, and I was in an art career in London. And when I met Peter, and suddenly, you know, life hugely dramatically changed, and I found myself uh, basically literally sort of flying off to join him. It was actually in the Caribbean then, and racing and sailing, and came back to the UK, got married, and then did this epic voyage, which was my honeymoon, sailing to New Zealand from the UK down through the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean, to Perth, then to Sydney, and on to Auckland. But in those, yeah, within that time, which was about 3 months, we encountered a cyclone in the Tasman Sea. We had to skirt round an island at the bottom of the Red Sea called Socotra, where the Sultan condoned piracy, just going down through the Suez Canal, and not that long before it'd been the Six-Day War. So it was some extraordinary things, and as well, I mean, perhaps a bit of the whole apocalyptic dystopian thing is from seeing the most amazing weather formations at sea, you know, huge clouds or red skies, and very dramatic sights that you do see at sea, out in the ocean. And the thought always that there you are, a little tiny speck. I remember that actually in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and I was the only person up on deck, and it was sunrise, and the sea was sort of golden and black and big waves, and I was just me on the helm, and thinking, wow, yeah, it's me on the globe in the middle of this ocean, and you know, how small we are, but how vast the world, and how amazing it was. So that's a particular time that I remember. So it's some amazing encounters of, I guess, the natural world at sea.
That raw power of the ocean for me as well is something that, when I think about the earth as a whole, there's nothing quite like being in a small boat out in the kind of open ocean. It really kind of emphasizes how sort of small and vulnerable humans can be. And this
very,
week I saw there's a new study that's come out actually, and it was saying that with a warming ocean, we're going to have increased waves in the Southern Ocean. So possibly, they're going up incrementally, but waves of the order of 25 meters in the middle of winter, starting to kind of be recorded. Which, when you think about the size of a 25-meter wave, it can certainly even large vessels will really struggle with that kind of condition.
gosh, yeah. I mean, when we were, I mean, I do remember, 30, 60 foot. I'm sorry, I'm going to say in feet. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, the 60-foot waves, and this particular cyclone we were in between Hobart, or Tasmania, and coming back across the Tasman Sea was pretty phenomenal and amazing experience. And the power, the power of the wind, the power of the sea, and it's a very humbling experience.
A lot of your work has focused on the sea and the ocean. Have those pieces been drawn from you seeing something, or is it sort of a mood, or do you take a photo, or what is that kind of creative process for you?
Yeah, I use photographs a great deal in my work, and in fact, the most recent body of work I did to do with the sea were really using images from my son James, having done the Volvo race as an onboard reporter. I mean, I'm not. The photograph is a tool. I mean, it's a sort of an add-on, and once you start working on the canvas, the photograph gets left behind. I mean, it's a reference point, but I very rarely would go back to that, because then the power of expression, the physicality of the paint, which is really my I'm a very gestural painter. I love to paint large scale, and those sort of aspects take over once I'm working on the painting, and you're not trying to in any way to copy the painting. I'm sorry, copy the photograph at all. It's all part of it's sort of an inner expression of a outer feeling, or a inner feeling of an outer expression, and it comes out somehow on the canvas.
And had you always wanted to paint since you were young? Was that something you were always doing, or did you kind of think you were going to do something else, or how did that kind of all evolve?
Well, originally I really wanted to be either an archaeologist or an anthropologist, because those are my greatest interests when I was really quite young. But then when I was for a start, my mother was a potter, so we always were making things or creating things at home. And when I got to school, to my secondary school, I mean, we always were doing art at home, but at my secondary school, that's where I really took off, and I realized that painting and drawing and observation and looking at that stage were the things that I really were drawn to, and ended up going from school straight to art school in London, and that really kicked off. I wouldn't say it kicked off but the love had always been there. Probably from about the age of, I suppose, 14, 15 is when I really became interested in art. And I mean, I don't think you particularly set out, I'm going to be an artist. It doesn't work that way, but it was something that naturally happened.
One of the you hear of these in education. You hear of these three kind of themes around art, academics, and athletics, and often people they gravitate towards sport or academics probably more so than art. But I think it's, for a lot of people, they learn differently, and they want to express ideas differently, or they have a certain connection with one of those three topics more so than the other. And I think that gives a lot of people purpose, and it gives a lot of people something to work on. And what's been interesting in lockdown is you've seen a lot of people, they've started to paint again, or they've started to pick up an instrument or do other things. Have you been more productive, or has lockdown kind of distracted you in doing that, or what's that been like for you?
Well, firstly, I think that those three A's, sort of art and athletics and academia, I think actually they all can interweave into each other. So obviously one might come out more than the other, but I think because you're on one, it doesn't mean the others are lost. So, but yeah, perhaps you will lean more towards one. But as far as lockdown goes, I think I thought initially, wow, this is going to be amazing. This is going to have all this time. I can't go out. I can't do this. I'll stay and paint. And I haven't been able to use my normal studio, so I've been working in a spare bedroom and put plastic sheeting on the floor.
You don't want to get paint on the carpet, right?
No. I haven't been able to use oil paint, which I love. I've been forced to use a medium, which I really do not like, acrylics, and I've stopped now with using acrylics because I just do not like, and also it's environmentally not good. So, but actually, my initial thought that you could make a lot of work, and now as a time, didn't quite work out like that, because I think you get used to your routine of how you work, and suddenly all routine was out of the door. Although I've kept walking, and you couldn't walk with a friend, I run, you couldn't run with a friend. So, and also you had to spend quite a lot of time organizing your life, because suddenly you couldn't go to the shops as you did before, and more domestics than I'd been used to. So that whole thing of your routine of getting into your studio and working sort of didn't go. And also it was a strange thing of almost not having a purpose, because the whole uncertainty of what's going to happen, how will life ever get back to how it was? Probably not. Maybe, who knows? That whole being very uncertain about life, I think, hasn't been great for making work. Certainly not from my point of view. I have made paintings. I've got some work in a show now of called Isolated Observations, of some work I have made, but it was it's a strange time. It's a strange time for all of us.
Oh, for sure. You touched on that overlap in art, academics, and athletics, and I think that's what Peter, in essence, was capturing with Blake Expeditions. He'd kind of taken this competitive sailing and adventure type idea from his professional experiences into a place to go to these environmental pulse points, scientifically important and sensitive parts of the world, the Antarctic, the Amazon. And then also he wanted to tell those stories with the documentaries and get people excited about these places and just show the beauty and the wonder of some of those environments. When you think back to before Blake Expeditions, what do you think Peter's kind of big idea was, or what do you think he was really trying to achieve with the Blake Expeditions?
I very strongly remember about the second time I ever went out with Peter, that he totally captivated me by regaling me with stories of whales, dolphins, albatross, the aurora australis. And I remember listening to him, totally captivated by his stories. He'd witnessed all these wonders, and that kind of carried on, although obviously he was doing very hard racing around the world non-stop, then into America's Cups. But underneath his real love, I would say, was for the ocean, was for wildlife. And suddenly, he realized, having come out the other side and not wanting to carry on competitively, that perhaps here was a chance to really set off on a new adventure. His whole life was about adventuring. I mean, as a family, we had our own sailing boat, cruising boat. So every school holiday was an adventure somewhere. We were incredibly lucky. I mean, my kids were incredibly lucky to have had that life growing up. It was fairly unusual, but it was a wonderful, wonderful experiences that we all had, and will remain with us forever. But I think Peter had, I mean, he particularly loved children. He loved children and he loved animals, and he loved the elderly. I mean, put Peter around a dinner party table and he really was not normally very happy unless he was with a bunch of mates. And he was, some people, because of his height and he had that sort of look, he was actually quite shy. So some of those great stories wouldn't come out, but it was only when you got him on your own, or he was with children. I mean, he just loved telling stories to children. So I just think he saw that as a way and got very excited about the prospect of Blake Expeditions and the boat, Seamaster, which was such a great work boat. That and the whole idea of technology and new technology and satellites, that he could see a whole way of passing on some of what he'd witnessed in his life and sailing around the oceans onto others. And that's really how it started. Just I think of his own passion for it and wanting to share the stories. And he had some great stories, wonderful stories.
One of the things when you look back at that footage, and I think it's so funny now seeing these enormous machines on the boat when nowadays you can do almost all of that stuff with an iPhone. But he was a real pioneer that many people were thinking, why have we got this radio on the boat, or why have especially with the around the world races. But he wanted to really tell that story in a unique and kind of powerful way. And in a way, what we're seeing now with COVID, 20 years later, is the need for those same stories is still as real as ever. We still have so much work to do. We still are having the same conversations that Peter was trying to start 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago. And has the world moved on in that aspect? Yes, I mean, there's huge awareness now, but at government level, is anything really happening? Of course, there are many great governments that are, but majority, I would say, aren't. I mean, they're putting their own economy growth first before that real awareness of what we are doing to the planet. And obviously it's fantastically highlight. I mean, there is great opportunity at this very moment for that change to come. We're all hopeful, but it needs those leaders to put it into action. I feel. I mean, there's some great articles being written, great books being written, great documentaries being made, but it needs everyone to come together, not keep themselves in their own lockdown.
I think we are seeing. I mean, there is a lot of fantastic work happening all around the world, and there is some real reasons to be optimistic and positive about the future, I think, and that's the way that we want to be able to tell these stories and say, look, if we protect these ocean spaces, or we can reduce the pollution in the waterways or in the air, then life is better than it was. So we're actually in a much better place. I mean, and Peter said that, good water, good life. These things are very simple, and when we show people that it can give them hope and get excited about the future, I think that's a really positive thing. We are starting to see that in sports now, as sailing with purpose and the ocean races, and what why do you think it's taken us this long? Do you think that's just the public kind of appetite for change is now so big that we're finally seeing that shift? Or
Yeah, but I think, you know, it's taken COVID-19 to has it taken COVID-19 to really heighten the awareness? And I'm not, I mean, I'm a yeah, an artist and a mum, and not a scientist or a fortune teller. I don't know, but it's yeah, I think it probably has. I mean, it's a wake-up call. I mean, everything that's going on in the world now, right now. I mean, not just climate change, but the whole sort of horrific things going in the US now, and these big issues around racism. I mean, yeah, a revolution is needed, and yeah, and that's great. Out of that comes great hope, because it means people are really, really wanting things to change, and so it just. I'm not qualified to say how to make those things change, but if enough people get together and listen, and then, you know, take action, then, you know, I mean, what great opportunities. And obviously it's great that, you know, in our small way, Blake is trying to make a difference, and you know, huge numbers of fantastic organizations around the world all out there wanting to make a difference. So I just hope that now is the time. I mean, because if now is not the time, you know, in 10 years time, 20 years time, it might be too late. So that's my rather dystopian view of life.
I think no one has to be an expert, and I think what COVID has shown me is that actually this is about a public conversation, and it's about everybody getting behind certain ideas or certain things around how we now want to live our life. And I think the appetite for change is now here, and I think people are now they've had time in lockdown to reflect and listen, and now what's happened in America as well, it's opened up a lot of people's eyes to listen and think and try and understand how you know, different people's lives are impacted differently, and I think now is the time for this kind of this broader conversation. So I don't think it's about being an expert or knowing all of the information, but I think it's about, you know, what do we want to do as a society? And I think actually what was 10 years of decision making to try and reduce emissions has been fast tracked to probably 12 or 18 months now, because what we do in the next 12 and 18 months is ultimately going to determine what happens with the next 10 or perhaps even 20 years. So there's a lot of really difficult things that have to happen in the next year or 2 years. And if they don't, then we're going to see even more frustration. And I think that's it's a really kind of strange moment in time, I think, for everyone to just kind of sit and reflect and try and understand, but then also agree on as a society what future we want to choose and what world we want to live in. And what we're now doing with Blake and Blake Stories is we're releasing these 4 statements: climate change, marine biodiversity, and fresh water. And with those statements, that they don't kind of cover all the wide-ranging environmental issues, but we think we've done a reasonable job at capturing the most important parts. And of course, these are kind of living documents, so we're going to add to those as new issues and new ideas emerge. But one of the things that we're doing with those documents is we're telling or we're sharing with people the action part. So often when we talk about these environmental issues, people might hear about them, but then they say, well, what can I do? I don't know what I can do. And so the action part's really important. So with each of those issues, we have these associated actions that individuals can do in their home or in their community, but then also what as a nation we need to do. And I think it's it's written in a way that's really easily digestible, so people can.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not just listening to you there. I mean, another great thing that has come out of all of this is that whole sense of community and people banding together. Who, you know, you keep hearing about streets of neighbours who've never spoken to each other have all come together. So I think community is very important, and passing on, and I think stories going to communities, and communities telling stories of what they're doing is you know, all those things are really, really valuable.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great way to finish the podcast, Pippa. Thank you so much. It's been it's always great to talk to you. If people want to look you up and look up your artwork, where can they find that?
Well, confess I'm a bit of an Instagrammer. So I'm on Instagram as Pippa Blake, and that's where I put most of my new work. And I do have a website. Got to update it. I've got a website, which is pippablake.com. So that's quite easy to find. And I'm about to have a show, which was meant to open in May, but it's going to happen in July now. So I've done all the work, and so I'm working towards setting out the show with the gallery at the moment. So there's a lot of positives in life, personally and globally. Obviously, there's been a lot of sadness, but I think, you know, optimism is the way forward.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, Pippa, and thanks
Okay.
for listening, everyone.